One of the things I have found that if things are not going the way you want them to do, the best thing we can always do is just do something nice for someone else. And that's kind of where this all started. Was I was going through a lot of stuff in my life. I went to a different country and I just started doing nice things for other people. I was not expecting anything in return. The people that we were interacting with, I have no idea if I helped them or not. I have no idea if we left them in a better place. The people that your lives you change, you may never know. So you should just go into doing something nice for somebody without any expectation of anything in return.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. Did you ever see the 1998 movie Patch Adams starring Robin Williams? And did you know that movie was based on a real person? Well, I didn't, but today's guest did. And it led him down a path that focuses on bringing smiles and humanitarian aid to people in need around the world. My guest today is Bullseye the Clown, and like so many things we all encounter in life, he thought he would dip his toes into a new experience just once, only to find the impact he had on others was creating several positive effects in his own life. We talk about why clowns are not just there for the kids, and we also talk about bullying and ways to prevent your kid from being bullied or becoming a bully, and how he discovered that real happiness comes from doing good things for others. So turn your volume up to 8 and let's go. Bullseye the Clown, thank you so much for being here on this Joyful Rebellion. I'm so happy to have you here, and I'm curious to learn a lot about what you do, why you do it, and the kind of people you help. And really what I would love to do is get some stories on transformations you've seen of the impact that you made. So tell me a little bit about what got you into helping people as Bullseye the Clown.
Well, I really started off doing stand-up comedy, and I thought that was going to be my ticket to freedom, and I was going to make millions of dollars and become super famous. And after 10 years of doing that, I realized, you know what, this is not doing what I wanted to do. This is not having the impact on my life that I thought it should have.
Okay.
And I was not as famous as I should be. So I kind of stopped doing stand-up. I did it for 10 years and I stopped doing it. And then I just took a regular job working in a warehouse for a while. And then my dad passed away. That was in 2018. And about that time, I guess I was probably 47-ish. My dad never traveled anywhere, never did anything as far as, he worked the same job he had since he was like 16 and retired from that job. So when he left me a little bit of money, I thought, you know what, I don't want to just waste the money on paying a bill. I wanted to kind of honor him in some way. So I decided to travel. And I remembered years ago seeing a movie called Patch Adams. Starring Robin Williams. It was about a doctor who really thought that people could be cured more through human connection, laughter, humor, and just being with people than by pumping them full of drugs. And I kind of remembered that. And so I went onto Patch Adams' website and I saw that there was a clown tour coming up in Russia in 2018. And I had never been out of the country. So I thought, okay. And I'd never clowned before, but I did stand-up comedy. So I thought, how hard could this be?
Right.
So just on a whim, I signed up for this clown tour. And before I knew it, I was on this plane flying to Russia. I get there, there's 35 clowns there in a bus waiting. And I kind of launched on this little clown tour. And I really never thought I would do it again. I just thought this is something that I'm going to do to honor my father. I'll travel for a little while. It was a 14-day trip. And then I would come home and then I would try to figure out what other kind of a job I wanted to have. But just on that 14-day trip, seeing the impact that the clowns had on people, it was amazing. And the thing was, I couldn't speak Russian, and most of the Russians that we encountered couldn't speak English. So we were kind of interacting with people physically. We were smiling and we were doing balloons and we were doing bubbles and we were doing all kinds of other crazy stuff.
Like international charades almost.
Pretty much, yes. And it was funny because some of the kids would come up and they would be like really frustrated with us. Like, they would come up and speak something in Russian. And then we would kind of go back and then they would be like, no. And then they would do it like 3 times. And then I do that same thing back. And they go, do you speak English? And then what I realized is that a lot of the kids could speak English. It was just the adults that couldn't. A lot of the adults have their children learn English so that they can get better jobs or so that they can maybe move to the US or whatever. But really, like the first thing that happened on this trip, we got into a bus. We were heading to an orphanage. And just while I was sitting on the bus, we were at a stoplight and I saw an old lady sitting. She was actually standing here at this bus station and she had a bag of groceries in her arms. And there were like maybe 10 people at the bus station, but nobody was really paying her any attention. And so I just kind of started picking on the window and she looked up and I'm not sure what she thought when she saw like a bus full of clowns. Then I just started to wave at her. And then she was just kind of like, okay. And then, so she just kind of waved and I waved a little faster and then she waved a little faster. And then the clowns on the bus saw what I was doing. And so they all turned and they all started to wave at the old woman. And then the light changed and we started to pull off. And as we pulled off, the old woman sat down on a park bench or the bench right there at the bus station and she started to cry.
Oh.
Now, why she started to cry, I have no idea. Maybe she's just happy we didn't kidnap her. My thought was that in that moment, somebody saw her. She was standing at this bus station with nobody around. I mean, there were people around, but nobody was paying her attention. And a bus of 35 people saw her in that moment. And maybe that's what it was. I mean, I don't know. But it was just like little things like that kept happening on this clown trip. And I thought, wow, there's something to this kind of craziness that I'm doing. There's just something to the power that we have as clowns. I mean, they would let us go places that they would not let anybody else go just because we were either clowns or because we were the Patch Adams or maybe a combination of the two. But yeah, stuff like that happened just day after day on this trip. And so yeah, I was just like, wow.
Now, what was the focus of that trip? Was it to bring joy to people? Was it to bring happiness? I know you're very much into the anti-bullying. So was that part of that trip or did it morph from that trip to become a little more?
Patches trips typically are humanitarian. So they're basically in the fact that we're spreading joy, we're spreading peace. And that was basically it. I mean, that's basically what his trips are. Everywhere you go, make people laugh. There's no whiny. If you're a clown, you're not to be whiny and you're not to be upset. It's to be happy, 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 happy. And as you mentioned, bullying, I was bullied as a kid. So I was kind of still carrying some of that anger with me whenever I went on this trip. And then my dad had recently passed away. And so I had that kind of grief that was going on there. What was really interesting was that after having to be happy for 14 straight days, it kind of wears on you, but you can't be happy and sad or happy and mad at the same time. So what I found as a side effect of traveling as a clown is when I came home, all the anger that I had from the years of being bullied and all the grief that I had about my dad passing, all that stuff was just gone. It was 14 straight days of not focusing on any of that stuff. And I was just focusing on making other people happy. And you just realize in turn, the side effect was that it makes the clowns happy. The clowns do it because it does something for them as well, indirectly. So that's kind of what I found to be the most shocking thing, I guess, is when I got home, I was kind of like, I want to still be mad about this.
Yeah.
And I was like, but I'm not. It was really interesting.
It's like it just wasn't in you anymore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just like, you know what? It was this pointless to worry about that kind of stuff. I mean, we saw people who were in hospice and we saw people who were in burn units and we saw little children who had cancer or whatever. And it was just like, all these little things that I was carrying around just seemed pointless compared to the stuff that other people are dealing with. And it was just interesting how, and you know, and my mom was like, oh, wasn't that depressing? And I'm like, not really. Because when we're there and we're supposed to be happy and our job is to be joyful and to make the people laugh, regardless of what's happening with their life, you don't think about it. I mean, you actually will walk into like a burn unit and you don't think about what you're seeing. You just think, okay, I got to try to make this kid laugh, or I got to try to be funny, or I just got to be with this person. And I mean, sometimes you just go and you hold people and they might sit on your lap and you might just hold them and cuddle with them. And that's all you do. You might not even do anything extraordinary.
It sounds like you were bullied as a child. When did you go from coming back from that 14-day trip and you realize, wow, I did some good in the world, but I did a lot of good for myself? It sounds like you had that experience. Then you realized, oh, I could help a huge group of people who are experiencing the bullying and maybe heal some of those old wounds. Did you really see a way to heal yourself through helping others at that point?
I did,
Yeah.
yeah. And I really never wanted to be like the poster child for bullied kids or anything
Yeah.
like that. But when I came back, I just started writing. I started to do just a little bit of writing. I mean, I ended up writing a short little book called Bullseye on Bullying. So I kind of tied in the clowning with the bullying, and it was kind of a blueprint for helping anybody who's been bullied. And so I started doing that actually then. So here I am, 47 years old, and I'm finally just now dealing with it.
Hmm.
And ideally, whenever I started wanting to talk more about bullying, that was the reason I wanted to talk about it, because I thought it was fascinating how there are people who are bullied as children, and then they're 47 years old, my age, and their life didn't turn out anything like they had hoped that it would because they were bullied.
Hmm.
But I found that fascinating that there are also people like Lady Gaga and Susan Boyle who were bullied as well, and then they became like superstars. And so I thought there's interesting that there are some people who will thrive because they were bullied,
Hmm.
and then there were some people who didn't thrive. And so my original aim was to kind of find the people who didn't thrive as adults because they were bullied when they were younger and they never got over that. And so that was kind of my initial reaction, was to kind of start with them
Yeah.
and try to find if there's a way that we can find all of these bully people who are still working at McDonald's at 48 years old, 50 years old, when they had dreams of doing something else and they just never did that because they felt they weren't good enough, or society told them that they were not smart enough, not pretty enough, not thin enough, whatever it happened to be. So that was kind of the whole way I started with the bullying stuff. But then I also do a lot of clowning stuff to it. And then even my clowning has kind of changed from what Patch does. I actually just led my very first trip to Guatemala in February. It was the first time I led a trip, and I got some clowns together from some of the other trips with Patch that I had done. And my goal, because you're always like, what's the goal? The goal for me was, I thought these trips are great that I do with Patch, but I wish we could leave something behind. What do these people need? Can I leave something behind?
Hmm.
So the first thing we started with was we were going with 200 backpacks filled with school supplies to hand out to the poor children. Because in Guatemala, if you can't afford school supplies, then you can't go to school.
Hmm.
The parents can't afford to feed you and to send you to school. So if you're young and you can't afford to go to school, then you work at home. So our goal was just to get 200 kids into school. We traveled with 200 backpacks and we got there. And when we did our first event, we realized, hey, a lot of these people that we're giving these backpacks to, they're hungry. They don't have food.
Hmm.
Then I kind of morphed while we were in the middle of this mission. It ended up being, we bought 200 pounds of corn and 200 pounds of rice. We also bought 500 juice boxes and 500 packs of cookies. And everywhere we went, we fed all the children with the juice and the cookies. And then we gave their family the rice and the corn to take home to cook and to feed their family. So it kind of just morphed into something bigger than what I had envisioned, but
Right.
but that's great.
Yeah.
I was happy with the direction that the tour took, even though that was my thing. It's like, oh gosh, I had to bring enough money, and I was more afraid that I wouldn't have enough money that we took for the trip. But things were super cheap there, and that's what was even more sad to me, was that I could buy 200 pounds of corn for $50, yet there are so many people there who weren't eating, that they couldn't afford just $50.
So it really did turn in for you much more of a humanitarian mission, not only for education, but also for nourishment and
Right.
the people you were serving. I'm curious how it's different when a group of clowns roll into a town that is impoverished, that is in need of basic supplies like school supplies, food, as opposed to maybe a church group who looks pretty normal, everyday, middle America. You may not have anything to compare it to, but what's the reaction you get when a group of clowns rolls into town? It sounds like a setup for a joke. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, and it is funny. We actually did have some local missionaries when we went to Guatemala.
Okay.
We actually had some local missionaries who traveled with us, and they were just normal dress. Anyway, the kids were not quite sure what to make of the clowns at first. I mean, and that was even on some of the patch trips. I remember right after COVID, we went into Morocco, and we had this whole time where we were off from not performing in places. The clowns couldn't go to any of these countries during the whole COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
So there was like 2 or 3 years where no clown trips were happening hardly anywhere. So we went to Morocco, and the very first place we went to, there were some really, really young children at this orphanage, 2 years old, 3 years old, and they had never seen anybody other than the people at the orphanage.
Hmm.
And so when the clowns rolled in, they were scared to death. I mean, they were screaming and running. And so,
Yeah.
so we first had to do some damage control. So we started playing with the older kids who weren't as frightened of us. And then when they saw us kind of interacting with the older kids, then the younger kids kind of go, oh, okay, they're okay. And then they would just come up to you and they would sit on your lap, or they would hold their arms up and they would want you to pick them up. So you just pick them up and love on them. And we had all kinds of stuff, coloring books and balloons and bubbles and games. And I mean, I have these little things. I know your listeners can't see this, but I have these little things I always take with me, these little rubber chickens.
Oh, yeah.
They're like a little slingshot, and then you
Classic.
fling them in each. Yeah. And so they love those. So then we just start playing with them. And that's kind of how this all morphs. And again, I got so off track, I forgot what the actual question was.
No, that's great. I was just curious, when you do come into a situation where probably other mission work is happening, and a lot of people who come into town, they're associated with an organization that is much less festively dressed, I guess you could say. It's like you said before, though, you guys, because of what you're doing and the vehicle you've chosen, which is the clown and the persona of that, you're able to probably reach people a little bit faster and maybe disarm any sort of apprehension they have, unless they've never seen a clown before, to which they're terrified, right? And then you have to work through that.
Some of the places that we've gone, it's almost like you're a rock star. So like you walk in and right away you're on because you're all dressed like this. So sometimes the kids just kind of rush you almost like they would like a rock star. For what I do, as far as like the stuff that I did in Guatemala, we always played first. We spent like the big bulk of the first part of the time playing, and then slowly calming them down so that we could give them whatever it is that we brought them. We didn't give it out first.
Right.
We would play with them. At some places, I feel guilty because we go in there and then we get these kids all riled up and then we go, bye.
Yeah.
Then the parents or the teachers or whoever have to figure out how to calm them down after we've been there. And sometimes they come in and they're well behaved, but sometimes as soon as they see the clowns, they're excited. They don't know what's going to happen, but they're excited for something to happen.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's probably the biggest difference than if we were not dressed as clowns. They would probably just come in and sit down and not really know what to expect. But the fact that we're dressed like this, they're expecting something big to happen, or
right.
at least something fun to happen.
Something out of the ordinary, for sure.
Yeah.
When you go from that type of audience in Guatemala and you are trying to help them not only relieve a little of maybe the mundanity of the day, but bringing them critical supplies to them. And when you shift from that type of work to one of your anti-bullying, is that in middle schools, high schools, elementary schools? Is there a certain age you try to target? Because you talked about people who are in their late 40s who were bullied and now it's affected their whole life.
I still do it more for children. So I'll go into like elementary schools. I mean, not usually like really, really young, so like kindergarten. I usually don't do kindergartens a lot, but I have done like, fifth, sixth grade, seventh grade. I know seventh, like a lot of times that transition from sixth grade to seventh grade can be a big one.
Yeah.
Because I know in our school, whenever I was little or younger, we would go to grade school up through sixth grade. And then we had like a middle school that was seventh and eighth grade. And then you would go into the high school. So there was a big transition from being a sixth grader, and then all of a sudden it seems like you're starting over in seventh grade.
Is that like fifth, sixth grade sort of time period where you see a lot of the most need for talking about anti-bullying?
I don't recall having a lot of issues with bullying younger. I mean, maybe they do now. For me anyway, I felt that it was the fifth and sixth graders is kind of like a pivotal turning point for you. Just even you got the kids who are really going to be tough and beat everybody up. And then there's also that pivot of, okay, you're going into seventh grade and making sure, one, that you're not a target when you get to seventh grade. And then also to make sure that you're not continuing to bully once you get to seventh grade. So it's just that to me that I felt that was like a pivotal period, is from fifth, sixth, seventh, and even eighth grade, because then from eighth grade, then you pop into high school. And I would say a majority of my bullying came really seventh grade on.
Okay.
Is when I really can remember it. I mean, I really don't remember maybe a little bit of name calling whenever I was in like fifth and sixth grade, but nothing like I got in seventh, eighth grade. And so that's kind of where I try to aim. But again, I go in as a clown because I think the two, in some ways, it disarms a
Right.
lot of the kids, and they're more willing to listen, I think, as opposed if I walked in there in a 3-piece suit and tried to talk about bullying. They're
Give
just
a
like, yeah, yeah,
PowerPoint
yeah,
on bullying.
yeah, exactly, yeah, yeah. So it just doesn't work that way. So I just kind of go in dressed like this way, and that leads to a whole new conversation. Well, it's somebody here doesn't fit in, and right away I'm the one that doesn't fit in because I'm dressed like a clown.
It sounds like you do a little bit of the talk about why it's important not to make yourself a target of being a bully, but also why it's important not to be the bully. How do you have those two different conversations with the same audience?
Actually, a lot of times I'll bring children up and I'll have them kind of reenact. And sometimes going into it, I try to ask teachers, do you have anybody who you know is a bully? And do you have anybody who is being bullied? And a lot of times I'll have the roles reversed. So I'll bring like the little timid kid up and, okay, I want you to be the bully, and here's what I want you to do. And then I'll have the bullied kid stand there and take whatever. One kid told me one time when I was working on my book that the way she tries to disarm a bully is she agrees with everything they say. So if they say, you look terrible today, you know what? I do look terrible today. Because it really takes their power away when they know that they can't aggravate you.
Yeah.
The bully will give up. And so that's one of the things I have them do. I'll tell the little kid who is bullied, just say everything that the bully tells you. Just say everything to this kid right here. Just say it, And then I try to have the other kid try to go back and forth with them. And you're just going to agree with every single thing that they say. And we'll do it a couple different ways. Then we may end up doing some other kind of different role play. But I typically try to flip it if I could find like a really tough kid. I try to have them be the victim. And then I try to have like the little timid ones always be like the bully to kind of give them a little bit of empowerment.
Right.
I also talk about body language and how sometimes we're bullied because of body language. A lot of times, like the little timid kids, I'll say, I know you're going to feel silly, but I want you to walk like Arnold Schwarzenegger would walk, and just kind of get them to shift their body and kind of work their body in a little different way. So those are the kind of things that I do. I mean, it's kind of fun for the kids. Is they get a kick out of what's happening, but at the same time, I'm hoping that they're learning from it as well. And they're seeing that there are ways that we can combat this thing earlier than what we do.
Is that the advice you give a lot of people when it comes to body language, is present yourself a little more assertively, and it doesn't have to be aggressive?
And being aware, like when you're in a situation, like even like on a subway or a bus or in public, not looking at your phone all the time and having your head down, because right there you become a target. If you're not paying attention to what's happening around you. The phones are great for a couple of things. One, they're a great little invention for having like your own little individual body cam. When something does happen, you can get it on video, hopefully. Right. Or somebody in the crowd is filming something, because everybody's always filming something with their phone.
Yeah.
So this is something that we didn't have back then. Same way, not only is this a great device, it can be a really bad device because then it distracts you and it keeps you distracted. You're looking at your phone when you should be watching where you're going. And a lot of times you just see you on your phone, and you've seen these people just walk up to people on the street and smack them in the head for no apparent reason. So it's just like kind of just being aware is kind of really what I talk about, is being aware and always being on guard. And I do talk about, if you need to, change your patterns. If you're always being bullied at the same place at the same time, then change your pattern. Don't be at that same place at that same time, or go a different way, or just different things like that. So it's just a combination of a bunch of different things.
When it comes to bullies, it sounds like there are certain traits, and they might not even know what those traits are, that lead them to bully someone that they feel has less power than them. What are some of those traits that people might want to look out for? You just mentioned looking down at the phone. We talked about body language. What are some of the things that might attract a bully?
Anybody who looks different, for one. What's really bad is that I think that if anybody looks like they have some type of a disability for some reason, that seems to attract them. And I don't always talk a lot about the bully in the fact that I didn't want to really give them any extra pages in the book. I really wanted to talk about the other person. As far as the bullies go, part of it is what their home life is like too. And that's not always something that you can see either. A lot of the bullies have a bad home life. Maybe they're learning that behavior at home. So they're either getting bullied by their parents at home, and then they are finding a way to get that outlet out. That's one of the things I do talk about in the book, is trying to find an outlet for the person who is bullying. So maybe they just need some type of an outlet other than beating up on another kid somewhere.
That goes back to that saying that we've all heard a lot, is that hurt people hurt other people. So if you're being hurt yourself and you are not happy, that makes you more likely to lash out at someone else who doesn't deserve it. Maybe you don't even know that person, but you just, like you said, you have to have an outlet for it.
And ironically, as I was working on the book, a kid who used to bully me in school sent me a letter through Facebook saying, "Hey, I'm going through a 12-step program. I'm supposed to be making amends to people. And I bullied you when you were younger. And I want to apologize. And this is the reason that I did it." And so and honestly, I didn't even
Wow.
remember that it was him that was
Yeah.
bullying me. I just knew that he traveled with like the group of kids who did. So then I was able to at least go back and forth a little bit. And can I ask you a couple other questions? And he was like, "Sure." So it was really interesting because I was like, "Well, why were you bullying me to begin with?" And he was mixed raced. And so he was like, "Well, I did it to fit in because I figured if I didn't bully you, they would bully me."
Mm.
So it was kind of like I would travel with the bullies. And then in order for them to not bully me, then we would just bully other kids. And I
Right.
was
So
like,
he was
"Oh,
trying to fit in and
yeah."
okay. Yeah.
It was really kind of eye opening too to kind of get it from his perspective. So then I was just curious. I was like, "Well, how's your life now? Are you happy? Are you?" And he wasn't happy. Like I said, he was going through a 12-step program. He has a job where he works alone because he doesn't work well with others. He can't integrate well with other people. So it was just something that continued. I mean, he was married and then divorced, and it was just kind of the same pattern his whole life as well. So I thought it was kind of interesting how they're not any better off than some of the people that were bullied who still haven't gotten over it. So it was just really an eye-opening experience for me.
Yeah, I bet it would be to have that story from someone you actually knew and had kind of forgotten about to see how everything's played out so far. Not that that is going to be the case every single time,
Right,
but
right. I mean, because a lot of times it might be like the star football player or the cheerleader who now is Miss America or whatever it happens to be. But
exactly. Yeah. Kind of moving from the bullying stuff, you in general, you talk a lot about happiness. If you're trying to keep someone from getting bullied, that you want happiness for them. But I would imagine you talk to people who are not getting bullied, who are not bullies, who just for whatever reason in their life, that's what clowns are supposed to do. They make people happy. Like that lady that you saw at the bus station in Russia and you started waving at her, and maybe that's the first time in a long time she felt seen by anyone else and she felt invisible otherwise. When you do talk about happiness, which is definitely one of the things that I like to talk about a lot, A Joyful Rebellion is all about that time in your life where you realize that all the things that you've been doing, whether it's the hard work or it's the complacency or whether it's just being oblivious to things around you, they got you where you are right now. And if you're not happy with where you are right now, then you have to decide, okay, what do I do next? That's what the Joyful Rebellion is all about, because we tend to have to do something that we are uncomfortable with. And I'm sure it was not comfortable to get in the clown situation the first couple of times. You had to get used to it. And then you saw the impact it had for others. Then you saw the impact it had for yourself. And it sounded like you experienced a little bit more happiness when you came back from that trip.
the biggest shock, really, since I was bullied whenever I was younger and even into adulthood, you try to be invisible. So you try to live your life so that not many people are going to notice you, so that
yeah.
the least amount of people who notice you, the less chances you are to get bullied. So to go from that to let's just plop you into a whole different country and then let's put a bunch of weird clothes on you and make everybody see you.
Right.
It was really a shock. I mean, there were a few of us, like I was one of those included, that after about the first week, we had what they called a therapy session. And there were a couple of us who were like, we need a day off. I mean, we need to take a day where we're not dressed like a clown, because I mean, this is a lot to take somebody who tries to be invisible most of their life. And now here they are everywhere they go. I mean, people are rushing you and talking to you, and it became overwhelming at times. The funniest thing was there was a day where we weren't dressed up. So myself and my roommate that I had when we were there, we took the day off. He wasn't feeling well. And I just mentally wanted to be free from dressing up. So we're walking down the street, we're shopping and doing whatever. And I keep walking by people and I'm like waving at them. And they're like giving me these strange looks. I'm like, why are these people looking at us so strange? And my roommate was like, dude, we're not dressed up. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. Because we had like 6 days where we were all dressed up. So I'm like this dippy guy walking down the street, like in my little my little jeans and jacket. I'm like, hello.
And they're like, what's wrong with them?
Exactly. I was like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. I'm like, I'm glad that's all it was, because they were giving me some strange looks. So one of the things I have found, that if things are not going the way you want them to do, the best thing we can always do is just do something nice for someone else. And that's kind of where this all started was, you know what? I was going through a lot of stuff in my life. I went to a different country and I just started doing nice things for other people. I was not expecting anything in return. And a lot of times the people that we were interacting with, I have no idea if I helped them or not. I have no idea if we left them in a better place.
Hmm.
And it's not for me to know, I guess. I mean, sometimes the people that your lives you change, you may never know. So you should just go into doing something nice for somebody without any expectation of anything in return. Sometimes you see it, like the lady at the bus station. And if we have time, I got one more little story that I can tell you if you want to
Yeah.
hear it.
Oh, I definitely do. And I'm curious if you've gotten used to that lack of closure in some of those situations. So you go to Guatemala, you drop off 200 book bags full of supplies, you get the meals, you get the food, and you do leave. And it's not like you leave a forwarding address for all of their letters of how that changed their life.
One of the places we went to in Guatemala was a nursing home, and it was where families would just go drop their parents off and leave them there. And then they would take their home and their money and just leave the family members in this nursing home. This nursing home isn't sponsored by like the country or the state or anything. So these people don't really pay to live there, but so they're essentially just living there almost like homeless people. But they do have helpers who are helping them. They have like nurses and stuff on staff. So those people are being paid. But then in order for them to eat, they have to go get donations from the community in order for them to eat. So that was one of the places that we visited. We took some of the rice and the corn that we had, and we had a chef who was preparing our stuff while we were there, and they made food for everybody and fed them while we were there. Now, we did have some rice and corn that was left over, so they've actually gone in. They go in once a month now while we're gone, and they send me photos of the people that we all met, and we get to see them eating. They're taking pictures of the food. So I'm now getting to the point where I'm sending money to them once a month to at least make sure that I know that they're eating at least once a month. I'm hoping that they're eating more than just this once a month. But we're doing what little bit we can. So in that respect, we are getting closure that way because we know that we're still making an impact while we're gone.
Right.
Now, one of the things that happened in Russia, if you've ever seen the movie Patch Adams, he doesn't always do what he's told.
All right.
So he was like, go into every room. So when we went to this hospital, it was a hospice. Go into every room, make sure you make everybody laugh. It's like, okay. So they sent us up to our individual floors, and I was going into the rooms. And when I got to this last room, they were like, no, you can't go in there. And I was like, oh, why not? They're like, no, she's mean. You don't want to go in there. She's mean. She'll throw things. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I got to thinking about Patch, and I'm like, oh, what would Patch do in this situation? And I know he would go in. So when the nurse kind of turned around and walked back that way, I thought, well, if she cusses at me, it's in Russian. I won't know anything what she says.
You'll
anyways.
have no clue.
It won't make any difference. I figure she's on hospice. If she throws something, how hard could she possibly throw it? So I thought, I'm just going to peek in. I opened up the door and I just started blowing bubbles into the room. And I just slowly kept creeping in little by little. And I saw that she was sitting on her bed, and she was kind of looking out the window, so her face wasn't even toward me. So I just kept blowing bubbles. And finally, one bubble kind of went by her eyesight, and she kind of looked up and she looked over. And of course, this time I'm not dressed like even I am right now. I had these big moose antlers and this big red nose. I mean, I looked like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I walked in and looked at me, and I kind of just froze because I thought, well, I was ready if she was going to throw something. And she patted her bed for me to come over and sit by on the bed. So I walked over to the bed and I continued blowing bubbles. And I couldn't understand a word she said because she was Russian, but I just was trying to show her how to blow bubbles. I'm like, oh, look, you just blow in the bubbles. And so I was trying to get her to blow bubbles, and she tried it once, and like one little bubble popped out. And I'm like, no, you got to do this harder. You just try this a little bit more. And so I did it again, and maybe like two bubbles. I said, no. And I tried to show, and I was really trying to show that it was like a big breath. So she reached back and she took a big breath and she blew into there. Although bubbles flew all over the place, her teeth also flew across the room. So I'm running over looking for her teeth, and she starts laughing. She's hysterically laughing, and I'm like looking for her teeth, and I'm trying to tell her, be quiet. I'm not supposed to be in here. And finally I find her teeth, and I pick her teeth up, and I'm holding her teeth. And about that time, the doctor walks in, and I'm like, I look like
everyone freezes.
Trying to rob this woman's teeth. And she's laughing, and he just looked at me, and he was stunned. He's like, he's never heard her laugh. The whole time she's ever been there, she says she's never laughed. What happened to her? I mean, she was on hospice. So what happened to her once we were gone? I'm assuming she's passed by now. I mean, this was 5 years ago, but at least for that moment in time, she was having a good time. So I can just rest in the fact, and I can get closure in the fact that I knew that for that 10, 15 minutes that I was there, that she was having fun and she laughed.
Yeah.
So, and so that's I guess you got to just take those those little wins when you get them and kind of go with that. And so that's one of my big stories that I love from Russia. And that's one of the things that made me want to continue figuring out a way to do this once I got home. I'm like, okay, there's something to this clowning thing. I got to figure out a way to continue doing this once I get back.
Yeah, and you have some suggestions. So if there's anyone right now listening and they're like, that would be really fun, and you have gone through how much it's helped you when you help others, and it's done a lot for you. So if someone just shy of putting on a clown costume wants to make a difference for other people, what are some of the small ways they can dip their toe in the water?
An easy way might be to donate time at a homeless shelter for the holidays. A lot of times they have people come in and help serve. No matter where you live in the United States, there's always nursing homes. A lot of times people's families don't come to visit them in nursing homes, even if it's just going like on Mother's Day or Christmas, or even taking just a moment of your time and visiting people in a nursing home. If you got a little dog that doesn't act up too much,
Right.
maybe you could take your dog in to a nursing home and cheer the residents up that way. Find a school for children with disabilities and maybe do something with them. Another thing that I have done is we do little giving trees where we'll find like a local school that's disadvantaged, and we will have them write on the little tree, like a little angel on the tree, and they'll write down what they want for Christmas, and then we'll make sure that we go to the community. And any of those little ways would be a way to dip your toe in the water. If you want to go on a clown tour, you can always go to Patch Adams' website, or you can go to my website, which is clownsonamission.com. And our next one, we're hoping to do, two of our clowns on my Guatemala trip were from Italy. So they were wanting us to come to Italy to do a mission. So I think that's what our next mission is going to be in Italy for next year.
Oh, nice. Okay, so now I've got more questions, because let's say someone here is listening and they're like, I have always wanted to try that on. I've always wanted to be a clown. How do you choose your clown name, or do you get to choose? Does someone else choose for you? How does that work?
When I went to Russia, I had no idea what I was doing. I had never clowned before, so I just went onto Amazon and found these clown clothes that I wore for that. And looking back, I mean, everybody kept saying, your nose is too big. I mean, I had this nose that was like almost the size of my face. Like, your nose is too big. They can't see your expression. So looking back, I'm like, oh, okay, at least I know these things now. All that stuff kind of comes. And they said, find something that you like. So I love moose. And so I bought this hat that had these big moose antlers on it. It was really from Christmas Vacation. What was it, Wally World?
Oh, yeah, right.
Wally World. It was actually a Wally World hat that I just flipped inside out so that you couldn't see their logo. So it was actually this Wally World hat. Then I kind of came up, I just made a name up. I called myself Moosel-Toes back then, and I had no idea. But then I think as you do it more, then you kind of will come up with your name. And some people I know have shifted. Like I have a friend who used to be Cupcake, and then she decided to go more with her name, and so she called herself Cindy D. I kind of had my Moosel-Toes, but I knew that I wasn't going to always wear those moose antlers. So, and how I came up with Bullseye was a really kind of a bullying thing. It's like when people are calling you names, it's like they're slinging arrows at you. And every once in a while, something that they say might hit the bullseye. And so that's kind of where that name came from. And I say, don't even worry about a name. You don't have to have necessarily a clown name when you go and do that. Just, you could be Clown James or whatever, or could go by your last name, call yourself Walter or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Don't have to
And like
have
I
the
said,
brand right out of the gate.
no, you don't have to have experience to do this stuff. I mean, this stuff will come natural. Every clown did something different. And when people didn't know what to do, the thing is, you just go and you sit in a corner and you start to do something. Because I've tried that. I thought, oh, I've got to be doing something. I've got to find. So I was either blowing bubbles or flicking the chickens or doing whatever.
Yeah.
And when we went to Morocco, I thought, you know what? I'm going to try this. I'm like, I'm tired that we had done like 2 or 3 clowning things in one day. And I'm like, we went into this orphanage and I just sat on the bench and I just started watching everybody else. And right away, a little girl comes up and sits on my lap and she hugs me. And they'll come to you. And then you just will find something to do, whether it's take a puppet out of your bag, blow bubbles, and you just sit there and brush their hair or whatever. So you don't have to know any special skills. It's just being with people. And if you know the language of the country that you're going to, it's probably better. So you can at least understand some of the things they're saying.
Just a few words. Right.
Because when we started going to Morocco and Mexico, all these kids were running up to me and screaming, pollito, pollito, pollito. I had no idea what they were talking about. And then I realized they were talking about these little chickens. So they're pollitos, or the little chickens.
Little chickens. Okay. Now that you said it that way, that makes a lot of sense for me, who only knows a little bit of Spanglish.
Yeah, that's pretty much me. I can say no dinero.
Baño. If I need to use the restroom.
Yeah. I can say, what time is it and when's your birthday?
Okay.
because I remember that from Spanish class. That's about what I know. But like I said, you don't really need to know. You figure it out.
Yeah. And in your
Yeah.
experience working with kids, because this podcast, there won't be really any kids listening voluntarily anyway, but if there are some parents listening right now and they suspect maybe their kid is either the bully or the bullied, how would you suggest them striking up a conversation given all the kids you've talked to and experiences you've had?
Well, I know a lot of kids don't like to talk about it, but I never did. I mean, when I wrote the book was when my mom found out that I was bullied as a kid. She had no idea
Mm,
because I never told them, because my feeling back then was, what will my parents think if I'm being bullied? Because they'll think that nobody likes their child. You
mm.
know what I mean? So that
Yeah.
was kind of where my mentality was at that time. So I don't want to tell my mom
It's
that
almost
nobody
like you were
likes me.
protecting them at some
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want my mom to know that nobody likes me. But I would say just go and have the conversation. I mean, I suppose if my mom had come up to me and said, "Hey, I noticed that you're a little more depressed than you normally are. Is everything going okay at school?" That might have opened it up. I don't know that I would have told her, maybe.
Mm,
But at least I know that she sees what's happening, or vice versa. If somebody who's a bully, "Hey, you seem really, really angry about stuff. Is there anything you want to talk about?" And as we've mentioned this entire podcast, it's letting them know that you see them, that you're aware of what's being seen. There's so many more distractions now than even whenever I was younger. We didn't have cell phones back then or anything like that. So a lot of kids just will go in, they'll close their door and they're locked in their room for the rest of the night, whether it's on Facebook or computer or cell phone or
right.
gaming or whatever. So it's almost like those have become the babysitters now. There's like some kids really don't have a whole lot of interaction with like their family and their parents. So I think that would be a nice change of pace for a parent to go in and just strike up the conversation with the child if they notice something different, and really pay attention to what you're seeing when your kids are coming home. Their actions will tell you a lot. You can see just by looking at their face if they're in a good mood, bad mood. If they
Right.
run right to their room, there's usually something. I mean, most kids don't usually run directly to their room, you
Yeah.
know, and go by you as fast as possible. So there's something might be up.
Well, that's a good point because you talk a little bit about it, but I'd like to talk more about it and then we can wrap up. But all of these devices, all of these different ways, just the fact that they're maybe not physically around the bullies, that doesn't end the bullying. There are more ways for it to happen now. But if someone is experiencing, or if someone realizes that their child is the victim of a cyberbully, what are some of the steps that they can take? Because it's not like you can separate those kids at that point physically.
Right. Yeah, no, cyberbullying is a big thing. Like I said, that was something that we didn't have back
Mm,
whenever I was a kid. The bullies would just make a house call. Yeah. Come and grab your underwear and run it up the flagpole. That was back in my day. But now that's why one of the things I talk about in the book too, when I talk about cyberbullying, is, you know what? We have this illusion that we have to be friends with everyone. We don't. And there are certain platforms that I refuse to become a member of. I was on Twitter once. I'm
mm,
like, no, this is not for me. I find that the bullying is worse on Twitter more than any other platform.
okay.
Also, the reason being is you don't have necessarily control over who sees your stuff
Mm,
on Twitter.
mm,
With Facebook, if somebody sends me a friend request, I can go right to their profile and I can look, and I do. I mean, I do a lot of things now, and I should be at my max of 5,000. I have maybe like 1,000 that are on my
yeah.
friends list on Facebook. And that's because I'll go through and I'll go down their feed for maybe 5 or 6 screens. And I'm like, if I don't like what I see, I click no, and I'll block them from seeing my stuff. It's just a way for me to kind of just protect me. And of course, you can make it to where they can't interact, but I don't want that either. So I figure I'm more selective with who I choose to interact with. And so that's what I tell kids. You don't have to be friends with everybody. That's not a normal thing. I mean, nobody's liked by everybody. And believe me, there's a bunch of people I don't want to be friends with. We have this illusion that, oh, well, so-and-so's got 10 million followers. Well, yeah, but how many of those people are really following that particular person because they like that person? A lot of those two are, or what do you call the little internet trolls who are just waiting for something that they can pounce on. So that would be my thing, is finding out what your kids are on, like what platforms they're on and how they're being interacted with when they're on those platforms. The two that I probably do the most would be Facebook and Instagram. To me, those are Instagram just because it's a visual thing. So I'm always
Mm,
posting pictures and stuff like that. And Facebook is where I do most of my communicating. I don't do Twitter. And plus, I usually have a lot more to say than just the little characters they give me anyway.
right.
So, like, I get in the middle of like my post, I'm like, done already? Wait a minute.
Done
No.
already. Well, while we're talking about that, what is the best way for people to connect with you if they want to get a hold of the book or maybe even see what it takes to get you out to their organization to talk about happiness, talk about bullying, talk about any of the stuff that you would like to promote? What's the best way to get in touch?
Now, the two best ways are my website. So I have one, bullseyetheclown.com. Then I also have clownsonamission.com. Either one of those, even if you're wanting to do the bullying and you happen to go to the Clowns on a Mission, I read all of the emails that come through both of those websites. And even my Clowns on a Mission stuff, I use some of the money that I get from doing some of the speaking engagements for the mission work as well. So a lot of times that's who I'll have to make the check out to begin with. So either one of those websites, I just changed my handle on Instagram to actually Clowns on a Mission Official. So that's the Instagram account. And then you can look up Bullseye on bullying and you can find me on Facebook.
All right. Good deal. Well, Bullseye the Clown, thank you so much for this conversation. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like to?
There's one thing I do want to clear.
Yeah.
A lot of people have even told me this, oh, you should be clowning for kids only. Actually, no, clowns are not just for kids. So like a lot of times when we go to hospitals, I interact with the nursing staff. I interact with the children's parents because they need just as much laughter as their kids do. They've been stressed out by their kids are having chemo treatments or their kids are having some issues with the hospital, their kids are burnt or whatever it happens to be. And there's so much stress that's involved in that. So a lot of times they just need a moment of fun and relaxation as well. So a lot of times I'll make them the butts of jokes. I might walk in and flip the chicken at them and the kid will crack up. And so then I'll give them the chicken and say, here, flip this to the nurse. And the next time the nurse walks in and wants to give you a shot or something.
Yeah.
So it's just like, we all need to smile. We all need to laugh. And as adults, I think a lot of us have forgotten how to laugh, forgotten how to have fun. And so it's kind of nice to learn how to be a kid again and just laugh and have fun.
Definitely. I'm glad you said that because it's true. A lot of times when I think of clowns, I think, oh, they're to entertain the kids, but it's really not about entertainment. It's about bringing that lightness and bringing that laughter. And for adults, anybody listening who maybe hasn't laughed enough today, I could say that would be me right now. I've been having a great time on this conversation. I've laughed a few times and I want to go laugh more. It's started something here. So thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for bringing your energy to this conversation because I'm going to go have a great rest of my day.
Awesome.
I hope you do too. Yeah.
I will.
Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for
Thanks
having
so
me.
much for joining me today. And if you have an extra minute, I have a favor to ask. Some of you listen to this show on Apple Podcasts, and a lot of you I talk to are on Spotify or Amazon. I'd love it if you would take just a second to leave a rating or a review. It lets the platforms know that listeners are getting value from the show and suggest it to others who are interested in similar content. And as always, if you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a guest suggestion, or just general feedback, I'd love to hear about that too. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or at ajoyfulrebellion.com.